Senator Housakis.
Yes, thank you. The point of autonomous sanctions is presumably to have some autonomy in making decisions on our foreign policy. And while I see the value of a contact group and multilateralizing sanctions so that there's greater impact, how do you prevent that from becoming essentially a kind of follow the leader approach to sanctions? And the world champion of sanctions you've mentioned is the United States already. And the United States has a variety of sanctions that are politically motivated, and they have secondary sanctions, which we don't agree with. How would you overcome that problem? How can we maintain a sense of Canadian independence in our foreign policy, Canadian choices in targeting the areas that we feel are most important to us, and having some pride in doing it the way we believe is best? Mr. Strayer?
Sure. No, I think that's a great point on the autonomy and the tension between autonomy and multilateralizing sanctions. I think from our perspective, there should be, I think, sort of a happy middle between the two. You wouldn't want, on the one hand, all sanctions to be totally multilateralized, because then you run the risk that maybe this is falling to sort of the lowest common denominator, only the cases that everybody can agree on, and you're missing opportunities to take an important stand on cases that maybe can't get that sort of immediate consensus. And so on the flip side, though, if everybody's going their own way, it kind of blunts the impact that's possible when you do multilateralize sanctions, and you can effectively shut perpetrators out of financial markets in Canada and the US, the EU, UK simultaneously. So I think there's certainly a pathway for countries to carve out their own foreign policy priorities in the areas that they want to take the lead on, and hopefully then encourage other governments to follow suit. And so we've seen that certainly, as you mentioned, the U.S. is the leader in sanctions, but there are a number of cases where other governments have stepped out in front of the U.S. and taken the important step to sanction individuals, or in cases that the U.S. has been reticent to take action on to date. I mentioned Vladimir Kara-Murza's case earlier, and there's others that we could point to as well. And so this is a conversation that I think we're having with all of the governments at the moment.
Mr. Silver, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, I think out of the 428 post-2017 Magnitsky sanctions, 79% of them have indeed been autonomous, separate from U.S. sanctions. While the U.S. are in the lead, these are entirely separate. And I think the idea of Canada convening this group is leveraging our unique role as a convener multilaterally to press other countries rather than by default the U.S. taking the lead. It would be Canada taking the lead and working multilaterally, as we do in so many other institutions, to ensure that in the case of human rights defenders like Vladimir Kara-Murza, in the case of Haiti, which Canada has made a priority now in response to Senator Simon's earlier question, where actually some of the folks that we sanctioned were recently visiting the U.S. So I think it could help Canada ensure that our autonomous sanctions are having far wider impact and resonance. And one point that might be of interest in the context of this group, but even autonomously, is that Canada can be looking to decisions of independent bodies like the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, like treaty monitoring mechanisms such as the Committee Against Torture, and using the decisions of these multilateral bodies, of these independent quasi-judicial mechanisms as a basis for our own sanctions, whether within a diplomatic coordinating group or autonomously.